Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in our today's webinar, where we'll be trying to understand the different challenges that are seen for medical device startups in their overall regulatory journey. Right. My name is Varun. I'm part of the EasyQ Solutions Forum. At EasyQ Solutions, we try to make compliance simplified by helping you guys understand the overall requirement in the most simplest way, and then also try to help you understand on how those requirements can be implemented, right? Before we go into the details of our today's topic, I would like to speaker with us today, Anushri Srivastava. She's been a good friend of mine and has been an industry expert for many years. Hi, Anushri.
Hi, Varun. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for that quick introduction. Research, and I have gone to medical writing. I've worked with clinical affairs, and in this entire journey, I've worked with a lot of medical device manufacturers across the globe. Today, and I'm very excited.
Thank you so much, Anushri, for joining us today and being part of this today's session and sharing your insights with the forum. My name is Varun. I started EasyQ Solution last year with an focus on trying to help the medical device community in understanding the regulatory requirements with my own experience, and then trying to help them in decoding the whole requirements. Right. Before we go into the topic and we try to look into the different thought process that we have for you guys today, one request for all the folks who have joined today's session: if you guys have any questions during the session, please feel free to add the questions in the chat box. Once the discussion is completed, we will go through your questions, based on the time that we have, and we'll try to answer your questions, right? For whatever reason, if we are not able to answer all the questions, please feel free to drop us a message, write an email, follow our page, and we will ensure that we will reach out to you and try to answer all your queries, right? So thank you once again. Thank you so much for joining today. And with this, let's start our session. So before we go to the next slide and start the discussion, a quick summary, right? So when we did our last webinar back in October 2023, right? We did it on risk management for software as a medical device, right? Since then, I have been thinking on what can be the next topic that we can take and share with the team who joins our forum. And I thought the most simplest but yet the most important topic would be to understand the different challenges a startup, a medical device company faces in their overall regulatory journey, right? So keeping that as the topic for today, let's see what are the different challenges. What are the different challenges that I have personally seen, Anushri has seen in our journey when we work with different companies, and how do you overcome those challenges, right? So with this, let's start a session. Emphasis on marketing history, but not on regulatory history. Pretty interesting. Anushri, your thoughts on this?
I think that's a very important point, and definitely something that I have seen. To summarize it, it's pretty straightforward. If you look at a company that is developing a medical device, you see that they do a lot of market analysis at the start of it, because they want to identify their current competitors. They want to see what has been done in this field and what is the USP that they can share for their product. And what happens in this thing is they focus so extensively on the product and design, which is understandable. Without a product, there would be no company. But later, it may come as a rude shock when there is a realization about the extensive work to be done on the regulatory side. You're spending your time and resources identifying your competitors and similar devices, but you're not really spending enough time to see the journey that those devices have taken to come to the market. What do you say, Varun?
Perfectly well summarized. I completely agree with you, honestly. Even in my experience, I've seen, the marketing team or, the business development team puts a lot of focus on understanding what the other companies are doing, which is absolutely needed, right? But I think in that mix, right, they often tend to ignore the regulatory pathway that the company would have taken, right? It might be as simple as even understanding the kind of classification product code that a specific competitors of theirs would have looked into or would have complied to for them to get the regulatory approvals, right? I completely agree with you. I think it's a very, very important point. Very often, this is something that companies ignore because they are so much into their development, getting the product out there, and the whole regulatory requirement kind of gets ignored, right? So let's see what we can do to overcome this challenge. Initiate product analysis at product conception stage. Try to start understanding your regulatory requirement as early as possible, right? And for this, you don't have to necessarily always spend a lot of time in doing complicated analysis. It can be a very simple thing where when you're doing your competition analysis, right, with your competition analysis, just try to understand with the existing database, with the existing information that is already there in many of the regulatory databases, you will get to know what your competitors' regulatory pathways were, right? So, start doing this as early as possible, and that will help you a lot. Manushree, what do you think?
Yes, I think also regulatory agencies are doing their part to make this information more and more transparent and readily available so as to aid newer device manufacturers. Of course, you're not going to be able to get an entire rundown of what exactly was done for any other device in the market, but you're going to see a quick summary which will give you an idea about the different kinds of testing that were needed, and not just that, you will see whether a device was, from the time of its conception, how much time did it take for it to come to the market. That gives you an idea about the kind of work that you should be expecting to get done. So I completely agree that from the product conception stage, this is something that you need to start building in terms of your regulatory knowledge and portfolio.
Agreed. Let's look at what else do we have. Regulatory databases. Manushree, I think this is one topic that you are very familiar with. Your thoughts on how can regulatory database help in having a good hold on the overall regulatory strategy?
So, like I said, that you have access to these regulatory databases. Once you go in there, you can look for device types that are similar to your devices, or you can look for your competitor devices as well, and you can see what has been the findings in terms of device recalls. I mean, of course, there are some devices like the J&J and Philips devices which are covered extensively in the media anytime a device recall happens. But you're also talking about these low-weight devices like sutures, surgical staplers and such, which may not be really covered in the media, but you can go into these regulatory databases and you can look at what were the reasons for device malfunction, recalls and such. And along with that, you will also get access to the different kinds of clinical trials that were performed in order to bring these devices in the market. So that's a very good, important step for you to look into when you're trying to build the regulatory knowledge for your device.
Absolutely. To add on to what Manushree just said, right, when you do your regulatory database analysis, it's not always you have to be with this thought process of, hey, I need to do an apple-to-apple comparison. No. I'll give you an example. Let's say your product is into AI, right? I'm just giving an example of AI because that's the thing of today, right? Let's say you are doing an AI on radiological side of things, right? And there is another company which is doing AI on the cardiac side of things, right? As the core principle of AI remains the same for both the product, right? You can still learn a lot of things from either companies, right? There might be a recall, there might be a 483, there might be, the clinical trials that a particular company would have done, which you can take as a reference and also see if that is relevant to your product. And if it is, that can also be a good input for you that you can take when you are doing your overall regulatory analysis, right? Nowadays, more and more regulatory agencies are trying to, come up with making data publicly available so that it's easy for the manufacturers to, carve their overall regulatory strategies. US FDA has done a fantastic job in that. We all are aware of that, right? Europe is coming up with their Uramed. Guess what? Even India's CDSCO is not behind. India CDSCO has also started, publishing a lot of data on their portal, which you can refer to, including devices which are approved, and from there you can learn and carve your regulatory strategy, right? Let's look into what we have next. Publication review. Anushri, again, I think I'll pass on to you to help our forum folks to understand what publication review is all about.
Thank you so much, Varun. Yes, I definitely agree. It is one of the crucial steps that a lot of manufacturers often tend to forget. And here what you do is simple. You get access to one of the public databases like Embase, PubMed, Engage, or even something as simple as Google Scholar. And in that, your work is to mainly look at the different kinds of clinical experience and clinical data published for the device types. We are not just talking about devices that are exactly like a device. We're also talking about device technology. So this way, you're going to be able to get a clear understanding of hands-on clinical data that are available for this, what have been the different kinds of risks that are identified, and that will help you incorporate this in your overall regulatory strategy.
Very well summarized. Thank you so much, Anushri. Let's keep one thing in mind, right? While you will never get a complete technical file or a complete dossier that a particular manufacturer would have submitted to a regulatory body. Definitely that's going to be their IP and confidential information. But even, a summary of those, like, for example, a 510K summary, or for example, the device listing that happens in the CDSCO's website, and you see the information, even that is a very key information that you can learn from, adapt, and use that in carving your overall regulatory strategy, right? So don't look, it's not always going to be that, you're going to get everything right out in front of you, but even snippet of information can be very important, very useful for you to, then use it in your overall regulatory strategy, right? Okay, so let's see what else do we have. Intended use or indication for use definition is not well defined. This has been one of the most frequent issues that I have seen in my career, right? Most often than not, intended use or indication for use is something that the manufacturers are not even aware of, right? It is so important that if you don't do it right, your overall regulatory strategy will take a huge hit. Let me give you an example. Let's say there is a product. Which which is used to actually do a diagnosis. It reads an radiological images. It reads a radiological image. It does the diagnosis, and based on the diagnosis, the patient can, the doctor can directly, operate on the patient. Then there is another product which, similar thing. It reads from a radiological images, but it is now not doing diagnosis, but it just creates additional information that the doctor can opt to use for him to then take the next course of action, right? So in the second product, it is more of aiding in diagnosis, right? Aiding in overall procedure that the doctor may have to look into, right? The classification of example 1, where the product is actually doing diagnosis and giving a final output, is going to be like a class 3 if you compare it with FDA, versus the classification of product 2, where you are aiding in diagnosis, is going to be something like a class 2 or a 2A. You look at FDA, you look at European classification. And based on these classification, one will have to do a PMA when you compare it from a regulatory standpoint of the US FDA, and other will have to do a 510K, right? This is how your entire regulatory strategy will change based on just 1 or 2 words here and there, right? That is how important intended use or indication of use is, and that is how it can impact your overall regulatory strategy. Anushri? Hello, Anushri? You're on mute, Anushri.
Oh, I'm so sorry for that. I was saying that I completely agree with what you've said. Your intended use and indication for use statements are going to be the crux of your device's risk classification. And if you're in this industry for a long time, you know that your device classification is what determines your entire regulatory journey. So I think we should dive right into the solutions and talk more about it.
So first thing, purpose of device. Anushri, you want to add on what purpose of device is and how people should take care of that? Manufacturers should take care of that?
Oh, yes. I'm sure you have to be very clear in your language. This is where your communication comes into the picture. For example, a simple device like a surgical stapler. You have a wound and a surgical stapler may be used in place of stitches. Okay? So, it seems pretty straightforward to say that this is used for stapling of tissues where there has been some sort of tissue damage. But no. You are expected to be extremely clear. You are expected to say something like the purpose of the device is tissue approximation so that the margins of a wound can be brought together to prevent any sort of exposure to the underlying tissue.
Perfect.
I think that purpose needs to be explicitly, very clearly explained in a manner that even a layman reading the instructions to you should be able to understand what it is that the device is doing.
Very well said. Thank you so much, Anushri, for that. I think, pointing towards what Anushri explained and what I was explaining, I think things like, whether your devices is for diagnosis, screening, aid in diagnosis, right? All that is very important. What clinical condition are you targeting, right? Is very important for you to define very clearly in your indication for use, which will then form the purpose of the device, right? Let's look into what next we have. Patient population. Anushri, what do you think about this?
Patient population, of course, again, something that's going to bring in or reduce the number of tests that you need to do, because if you are talking about patient population as just your adult patients, or you add on your pediatric population, or you have some sort of a limited population with specific comorbidities, how it affects your overall journey is the kind of testing you need to do for your device. If your device is intended for adult and pediatric population and you are bringing data, clinical data to the regulatory agency where you've covered adult population only, you may not be allowed to include pediatric population for your target population of the device. So this becomes very important where you have to decide the capacity in which you will be able to conduct your clinical studies as well before you find your patient population.
Very well summarized. I think I have nothing more to add on to that. Let's look into the next point that you want to share with our participants today. Users. Users is another very important point that you need to keep in mind, similar to your patient population, not only from the perspective of when you do your clinical studies based on the intent use that you have defined, but also the human factors, right, which is one topic which is heavily ignored again by many manufacturers, is the human factors, right? The human factors is purely driven by the users or the user population that you define, right? Be clear what are your user population. Be clear what all different users you have defined within your intended use of the device, and based on that, not only your validations and your clinical studies are going to be focused upon, but also the human factors that you need to do to prove that your overall safety of your product will also be something that will come into the picture, right? Anushri, do you want to add on to that?
I think you've covered it well, and this also goes in line with the next point that we have over here, which talks about the use environment. Because again, whether your device is being used by clinicians, specialized nurses, or if your device is something that's going to be prescribed for home use, wherein a patient is using, you are going to have to see what are the different applicable industry standards to which you need to show adherence. Because if a device is meant to be used by patients, you need to be able to incorporate that kind of information in your instructions for use so that your patient is also going to be able to understand these things. So this is how it changes your overall regulatory landscape. And I think moving on to the last point that we have, this is very interesting because it tells you that you can go look for similar devices or devices that you plan to show as your predicate, and you see the kind of language that they have also used in your intended use. Why this is important is if you're claiming equivalence with a predicate device and your intended use and indication for use statements are vastly different, you will not be able to claim that equivalence. You're going to be questioned on that. So this becomes a very important exercise, especially for devices where you're going to be claiming equivalence.
Perfect. Very well said. Thank you so much, Anushri. with the thought process of the use environment, right? When we were talking about the use environment, I'm going to dive into the next challenge that we have seen so frequently, and we'll touch upon the use environment point as we discuss the next challenge as well. Inadequate consideration to safety testing, right? One of the most important aspects, especially for, this is mainly focused on the active devices, right? If your device is something which is using either a pencil cell or a AA battery or a lithium ion battery or a power charger, power adapter to power the device, right? For the device to function, right? This is something you need to consider. So often I have seen that manufacturers, they come to me and they say, hey, we want to, go to US, we want to go to Europe, or even we want to do our India CDSCO approvals, right? We are all ready, our device is doing what is to be done, we have done the clinical studies, our results are all in our favor, let's go and get the approval. We go and get the approval, and so often I see that the safety testing was not done. Not only that, when we go for safety testing, most often than not, I see that, there will be some sort of a failure which will push the manufacturer to go back to their drawing board to the level where they might even have to consider the entire design change for the circuitry that they would have approved, right? It can lead to a tremendous impact on your overall timelines and, most importantly, even your cost, right? So, inadequate consideration to safety testing has been something that I have seen quite often and would be something that I would highly recommend for any manufacturer which is into active devices, right? To look into this, in the most important way and as early as possible. Honestly.
Yes, I think you've covered this very well, and I would just like to reiterate that this is of utmost importance in a majority of devices that are drawing power, so basically active devices. And as we go into the solutions, you'll also see how early testing is the key to having a smooth regulatory journey. Over to you, Varun.
Early testing, or we also use the word pre-compliance, right? What I typically recommend manufacturers is, while you are in your design stage, right, while you are doing iterations, you at least do pre-compliance. Pre-compliance is nothing but you go and work with the testing agency and you do some of the key testing, such as high pod testing or leakage current testing, right, which will give you some sort of confidence whether you are going in the right direction or not. Even your emission testing, right, the EMI EMC testing, do certain key testing which will give you good confidence that you can build into your system, right? So early testing, you don't have to do a full-fledged testing, you don't have to go through all the testing that are needed to show complete compliances, but at least some of the key testings, if you identify in your early stage during your design phase itself, right, as part of your pre-compliance, that will help you a lot, right? Manoj, you want to add on to that?
I think you've covered it all.
Understanding the requirements, right? Before you even go for your pre-compliance testing, right, it is important for you as a manufacturer to even understand what is 60601-1, what is basic safety, what is 60601-1-2, what is EMI EMC, right? What are the key requirements from these standards that you should keep in mind from your design perspective? Most often than not, I see that in the requirement spec itself, the companies would just say 60601-1 as a requirement. I would recommend you to at least dive a little bit more further and define the specification with more clarity as to what 60601-1 really means for you, right? What are your operating temperature? What are your storage temperature? What is your operating humidity, right? Altitude in which you think your device can work. All of this, if you try to understand as early as possible, will help you to gain compliances to this in the most smooth, and your overall iteration will be reduced, right? Because all of this is going to be forming part of your 60601-1 compliance, and eventually even towards your EMI EMC compliances as well. Thoughts, Anushree?
Yes, I think this is going to be a running theme to this discussion, where we're going to be talking about how most of these problems, most of these hurdles can be overcome once you start to think about them at the design stage itself. Because a lot of times the design stage becomes so extensive that considerations to safety testing become more like a secondary priority. And here we are trying to put emphasis on the fact that this may just be the thing that delays your regulatory approval. So do it on time. Absolutely agree with this.
Use of components which are medically grade or certified. Let me tell you one thing, right? Many a times companies come to me and they say, hey, we are using all these components which are medically grade and they are certified, so our product is going to fly. That statement is not correct. What is correct is that if you use a medical grade component, or if you use a component which is already pre-certified, right, then that will build into your confidence on getting the approvals in the right way. Your overall, it will add on to the confidence of your product to meet these requirements, right? Battery, very, very, very important, guys. IEC 62133 is the standard for battery compliances, right? Please make sure that your batteries are compliant. When you go for your safety testing, the battery safety compliance is something that will be looked into, that will be something that they'll be questioning. And if you are compliant, if you're using a battery which is compliant to the standard, then your overall compliance to 661 again becomes very easy for you. Otherwise, the onus on ensuring the battery is safe comes on you, which is again a very tedious task, right? Similarly, the adapters that you use to charge your device, make sure those adapters are medical grade. They will have inbuilt safety mechanisms in them. They will have inbuilt designs in them that will basically help you to reduce all the emission related activities. It will help you to get your compliances faster, right? So please keep this in mind when you are doing your overall designing for your product. Anushree?
I think I just want to add that if you've been in this industry long enough, you'd know that the lack of use of medical grade materials is what led to the emergence of the UNDR, right? We had the whole breast implant scandal. So this becomes extremely important in that regard as well.
Absolutely. A point that I was mentioning before the slide, right, about the use environment. Why is it also important is, based on the use environment that you guys define, right? Typically, use environment are defined in two categories. One is your home health, and other is your professional use environment, or your hospitals and all, right? Based on what you define your use environment to be, right? The acceptance criteria for your emission testing will also vary. So use environment plays a very important role even from that perspective, right? And I wanted to just ensure that I highlight this point for all our participants today, that how your intended use again ties up to even things like safety testing that you will have to do to show your overall compliances.
Yes.
Let's move on to the next one. Emphasis on security testing but lack of supporting documents. Again, as AI is picking up, pretty much we see AI application being used in every other medical devices that are coming up, right? For one thing or the other, right? The whole requirement of cybersecurity is coming up in a very, detailed manner, right? There have been multiple guidance documents that FDA has been working on. They have published one very recently last year. The MDCGs are coming up with their own guidance document on tackling the requirements for cybersecurity, and India is also very soon going to come up with their requirements as well, right? So what I have seen is most often than not, companies are doing a fantastic job in ensuring that they have a good hold on the testing activities relating to the security side of things, right? So the VAPD testing, the penetration testing, they do it in the most reliable way that you can think of. But what happens is the supporting evidences, the supporting documents that needs to go along with the test report that you may have generated because of all these testing is something that is not being looked into properly, right? And that leads to a lot of challenges for the manufacturers when they do their regulatory submissions. They quite often get a lot of questions on their documents, supporting documents in line with the cybersecurity requirements, right? So keeping this as one of the key challenges, let's see what we can do to address this challenge, right? Ensure the emphasis is given to required cybersecurity document along the testing, right? Anushri, have you observed that one key requirement which is consistent throughout the four challenges that we have seen so far is the fact that we start early, right? Earlier you start, better for you, right? So even though when we talk about emphasis on cybersecurity document along with testing, you want to understand the requirement as early as possible, such that when you are developing your device, when you are doing your other design control documents, cybersecurity documents are also something that you consider and you start working upon that, right? Anush, you want to add anything?
I think the whole point here is document. Whatever you do, document it. I think most manufacturers and their teams are excellent at conducting the required testing. But what happens is we rely too much on being able to explain. But when you're having those meetings with the regulatory agency, it's not about what you're saying, it's a lot about what you're showing in terms of your documentation, your records. So whatever testing you're performing at whatever stage, if you're not able to support that with adequate documentation to show the way in which the testing was done, the exact processes that were followed, and how the testing conclusion was derived, then it becomes a little bit of a mess because you're not going to be in a position to justify that adequately now.
Perfect. Let's look into what next do we have. Appropriate guidance document. As I was mentioning, right, the regulatory agencies, starting from FDA to your UMDRs to, the CDSCOs, are doing a lot of good work in upfront telling you what needs to be done, right? It is up to the manufacturers to, look into those guidance documents, try to understand the requirements, and then translate those requirements in as part of their overall design and development cycle, right? So please emphasize on understanding this guidance document. Also, these guidance documents are also undergoing changes. So it's not about you looking into it once. It is something which should be built into your process. It is something that, you continuously keep actively looking for as the guidance document changes, as there are new guidance document that comes up or new standards that comes up. You make sure that you understand the new requirements and modify or add onto what you may already have, right? So that would be another thing that, we should definitely consider as part of your overall strategy, that, looking into the guidance documents that are published by the regulatory agencies. Update the documents and when security okay. Like your product, right? Like your software product, like even your any product, right? Is not going to be remaining the same from day one that you would have got your approvals, right? As you learn, as you get your feedback, as you get your complaint, you are going to improve your product. You are going to improvise you're going to modify your product to ensure that, those feedbacks and complaints are taken care of, right? What happens is, many a times, organization, they are very well documenting the changes that they do to the product. But again, the changes that happen to a software product, because of that changes, how your overall cyber security side of things gets impacted is something that is not properly done, right? I will also give you one more example where organizations, they do a VAPT, let's say on version X of a particular product, right? The version X goes on to the iterations and becomes version Y, right? It would have taken another 18 months, 24 months or whatever. And after 24 months, on the version Y, the company, wants to do a submission, a regulatory submission, right? Using the documents of version X. Now that's going to be something that the regulatory agencies are going to question you on, right? That is something, if either you need to justify in the most accurate manner and clear manner, or if not, then you need to ensure right from your testing to your supporting documents are updated to ensure that they are in line with version Y, and not just assume that, hey, whatever we did for version X, straight away is going to be carried forward for version Y, right? So making sure that, you have a active process which helps you to manage all these security testing and the supporting document would be a key for you to ensuring the smooth ride in your overall regulatory compliances. Understand?
Yeah, I think this ties well with what I said earlier about making sure that you're documenting things at every stage. And I think it also requires you to take that extra step of ensuring that you're constantly looking for any updates that are being made, not just to the device design, of course, but also in terms of what is required by the regulatory agencies and what is required on the industrial standard level in terms of providing information about the testing that you've done. And at any point, if you've missed documenting any sort of change or any sort of update, I think it tends to put a question mark on your credibility and your overall process that you're following for your device.
Agreed. And that gets on to our next point, that the whole cybersecurity requirement should not be an standalone thing. It should not be something which is a one-time activity. It should be built into your process, right? Taking a further step, if you look into the FDA's recent guidance document on cybersecurity, it actually asks you to have a cybersecurity process itself, right? So, put into your process, ensure your development process includes cybersecurity as a key component, right? Right from your requirements to your testing to your change analysis, cybersecurity is something you must look into and ensure that you have a good hold on it. Again, to make sure that you have a smooth ride as you move forward. One more thing, guys, that I want to highlight is when we talk about cybersecurity, it is not only about AI products. It is not only about SAMD. If you are a product which has firmware, no software, just firmware, you need to ensure cybersecurity over there. If you are a product which is using Bluetooth to do communication, cybersecurity comes in that area as well, right? So don't be under this assumption that cybersecurity is only about something to do with internet. It is anything where, if you're dealing with data, transferring data, storing data, any sort of activity around that, if your product is into, then you want to make sure that security is overall, security is looked into and the requirements of security are properly taken care of. With this, let's look into our next challenge or next key area, insufficient clinical evidence. Honestly, this is something I know you are an expert of. I have learned a lot from you, so I'm going to pass on the ball to you and hope you can share good insights to all the participants today. Insufficient clinical evidence, Anushree.
Thank you so much. Well, insufficient clinical evidence is something that I have spent 11 years of my medical device journey hearing about. A lot of manufacturers, in fact, this is one of the biggest hurdles that they experience, not just startups, but also established manufacturers, where they come to us and they say that there is insufficient clinical evidence. The problem here lies in the way in which you perceive clinical evidence. So, what happens is the manufacturers often get keyholed into focusing on the specific device. But here we'll be talking about what you can do when you do not have data for your specific device or similar devices in the market. So let's look at the first solution. Okay, focus on device technology. Clinical evidence, like I said, is not just about the pre-market clinical trials that you've done or the non-clinical testing that you've performed. And if you feel that you've not had that kind of budget to do these tests, you feel that you do not have sufficient clinical evidence. But this is where the whole concept of state-of-the-art comes into the picture. When we talk about state-of-the-art, we are concerning ourselves with the device technology only. We are not talking about that specific device. We're talking about this disease, the disease that is going to be treated with your device. We're talking about the different kinds of technologies that are currently being used and that are currently in the market to treat that kind of disease. And then we are trying to draw the clinical evidence on those technologies as well. Great for you if your technology is not novel and there are other devices that are also based on this technology, because then you're going to be able to draw those clinical data to support the clearance of your device by saying that, see, this technology is already in the market. This is what the clinical data that are available for this technology. And along with that, in the next point you see that even if you're not able to talk about your specific technology, you can talk about the alternative ways which are available to achieve the same therapeutic purpose. How does it help, you may ask? It helps by talking about the clinical data for these alternatives and identifying a gap, an unmet need, which you can say that your device is actually trying to address that unmet need. So this is how you can focus on alternatives. This also becomes a part of your state-of-the-art. Going to the next point, focus on post-market surveillance data for predicates. Okay, so what happens is that you're trying to show that you're leaving no stone unturned in demonstrating the safety and efficacy of your device. When you're looking for PMS data on predicate or similar devices, you're basically trying to see that a device that has been used in the market so far has been able to achieve a certain level of performance and safety requirements. And using these post-market surveillance data as well as clinical trials data for the for the predicate device, you're going to be able to say that my device, which works on similar technology, is expected to follow this kind of profile as well. And that is the kind of way in which you're going to communicate how these data will be able to support your device data. Next point, emphasis on sample size for clinical investigation. Now here we are talking about working with your biostats team to plan clinical trials and sample sizes, because sometimes your device, like I said, it may be used on adult or pediatric population. You should be in a position to justify the sample size that you're using. If you have a clinical trial, a phase 3 clinical trial, and you're showing the data on just about 15 patients, there may be a question on the statistical strength of the results that you have. So you have to sit with your biostats team and plan your clinical investigations in a way, or show that you're going to be planning these clinical investigations in a way that are going to provide robust data. And finally, moving to the last point, here I always tell the manufacturer that it's not just about the data you have, but also the data that you plan to collect. This shows proactiveness. So if you're having a strong PMS plan and a strong idea of your post-market clinical follow-up, you're going to basically tell the regulator that this is how I'm going to be monitoring my device's performance and safety and collecting more data after you provide clearance to my device. So always remember, there is nothing as such like insufficient clinical evidence. I want to say it's a very bold claim, but I would say that there are always ways to derive clinical evidence to support your device's approval in the market.
Thank you so much for that, Anushree. I think that was a very well summarized solution for the insufficient. While you were talking about this, right, Anushree, there is one point I would request you if you can add some more light on the whole concept of state of the art, right? What it means, and how the manufacturers should look into it. If you can share some light or throw some light on that, it will be very helpful. The state of the art requirement.
Sure, absolutely. I think state of the art is often mistaken to show which is the best technology or the best device in the market. That's not what we are looking at. What we are trying to show is currently what is it that is being done to achieve the same therapeutic purpose as provided by your device, right? So that's why I said you look at the alternatives, you look at different ways in which the same therapeutic purpose is being achieved. And what you're trying to do is that in the industry, this may be a gold standard, a certain technology A may be a gold standard, and you're going to try and see what is the performance and safety profile for that technology, and whether you're able to deliver something that provides the same kinds of results and the same kinds of profiles. Your state of the art is about just determining what is currently happening and whether your device fits into the current mold or it is something that is going a step above that. So this is the discussion in the state of the art.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And you know what, Anushree, off late I've been talking a lot with some of these manufacturers in globally, right? And what I realized is with the new EU MDR coming in, right, one of the key reasons why manufacturers are seeing difficulties, and also some of them have actually seen a rejection of their technical file, right, is in this area of the clinical evidence, the clinical evaluation that we talk about, right? This is also becoming very important, especially when you talk about the whole European side of things. Okay. Anushree, communication gaps with regulatory authorities, right? Remember, we keep talking about this, that how manufacturers are always shy in talking to the regulatory authorities, and that leads to so much of confusion between what is needed versus what is being delivered, kind of a thing, right? So communication is important, guys, right? As we understand, it's the most basic requirement, most simple requirement, but very often being being ignored, right? Communication with regulatory authorities will help you to ensure that from day one you give that transparency and the confidence to the regulatory authorities through which when they review your file, right, you will have a better overall flow of information, right? So this is something that, many a times manufacturers shy away from, right, to do a pre-submission or to get notified bodies involved as early as possible. They try to see if there is something they can skip and not have a good communication with that leads to not having good communication with the regulatory authorities, right? Your thoughts on this, Anushree?
I agree. I think manufacturers have a tendency to perceive regulatory authorities as a strict examiners who are looking for faults in their overall process or device design. Instead, I would say that it helps to forge an easygoing equation with the regulatory representative that you're working with, where you understand that you're both on the same team trying to bring a safe device to the masses. So take feedback from them, and let's look at the solution that we have here. Engage with regulatory bodies at an early stage and take their feedback. I think that's exactly what I said. You talk to them, you ask them whether they see any deficiencies when you're talking about pre-submission, and take that feedback and then work with them to see how well you can address those gaps.
Yeah, absolutely, right. The pre-submission is one good example that you can opt for, right? Many times what happens, guys, the manufacturers think that, hey, we do pre-submission, the FDA will talk to us and then FDA will give us some requirement which will become additional requirements. No, that's not the case. FDA will understand your thought flow and then they are going to give you inputs to better your thought flow, right? So the whole, the way we perceive this thing is not correct, right? Where FDA is adding more requirements to you. No. The FDA is actually helping you to understand the requirements that they have defined in the right way, right? So engage with regulatory bodies as early as possible. Not only just FDA as an example, notified bodies, right? For your EU market, you can engage with them also as early as possible. From CDSU in India also nowadays, you can talk to them, you can reach out to them, you can write them emails, letters, and they have been pretty responsive in giving you clarity that you may be seeking for, right? So engage with regulatory bodies as early as possible. And I was telling, a couple of slides back that, doing things early is the thing that you guys want to, focus on, mark it, bold it, italics, highlight everything for your regulatory strategy as early as you start better for you always, right? Acceptance of deficiency and addressing them in a clear manner. Most often than not, whenever you do your regulatory submissions, right? Remember one thing, you are the manufacturer, you are the person who understands the technology and the product better than anybody else can, right? So you are going to get some deficiency in the way that they may ask for more clarity or some additional documents or things like that during your overall submission process, right? That should not be seen like a negative emotion, but it should be seen something that you should have a positive mindset for and address them in the most simplest yet in the most clear manner, right? Understand the deficiency, what they're asking for, understand what they're looking for, and then try to address that. If that means that you need to create another document, right? Don't shy away from that, right? Don't see that as a stress on your overall system. It will only help you to improve your existing system.
Absolutely. I think we've covered this at the start of this topic. Acceptance of deficiency and not getting defensive is very important. Of course, your product is your baby and you don't like it if somebody tries to point flaws in it. But here's the thing, they're not pointing flaws. They're trying to make sure that your device is meeting the required standards. And again, you're both in the same team. So, like I said in the third point, have a positive mindset. You're not here to defend your device. You're here to make sure that your device has the best regulatory process overall, is what I would say.
Absolutely, I agree on that. And guys, one more thing that I would like to, in common to all the discussion that we had, right, all the discussion points that we had, right, documentation was something that we kept on talking about, right? Think about this, right? You might be located in whatever region that you are, and now you are seeking an approval for your product. How do you think you're going to prove that you have done your things, right? It's going to be in some sort of a documented manner, right? So documentation should not be seen as a hurdle. yes, you can be you can be efficient, you can be smart in how you define your processes, but still, end of the day, it is going to be a key requirement. It is going to be a requirement that you cannot ignore. It is going to be a requirement that you cannot, just take it at the end. Documentation is key to everything that we discussed. Be smart in how you do it so that it doesn't add additional stress to what you have to do, and it still meets the overall regulatory requirements and the expectations that have been set by different standards and the regulatory bodies, right? With this, we come to an end of our session. Anushri, thank you so much for being part of the session and sharing your insights, right? I think what we'll do, Anushri, is let's see if we have any questions from our participants, and let's try to address some of them with the time that we have. Guys, if we are not able to answer all the questions, as I said, please reach out to us, follow us on LinkedIn. We'll be having more such seminars for you guys, where we can share our experience and our learnings, right? And you can learn from it, right? Please feel free to reach out to us. Let's see what questions do we have. Anushri, do you want to have a look at the questions?
I think we have a shy audience here. We don't have questions at this point, but let's open the floor to the attendees. Guys, if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Or if you're shy, you can also reach out to us.
Reach out to us. Yep.
Anyone? Okay, I think.
Okay, no problems. I think we'll once again, Anushri, thank you so much for your time today. I think it was very, very important, right? And to all the participants who joined us, who removed time and cared to be part of this overall discussion, please write to us, reach out to us. Let us know what is that you may want to also learn about, right? We will take your inputs. We will try to form webinars around it, and we will support you on that, right? That said, I think we have a question. Anushri, you want to have a look at that? Because I cannot switch my screen. Yeah, thanks.
We see a question from Ankit, who's asking, could you highlight the general cybersecurity requirements for active medical devices?
I'll take that. Thank you, Ankit. Thank you so much. So, when you talk about general cybersecurity requirements, I'm going to give you some pointers that you can take up, right? First is, look into your testing to begin with, VAPT, right? Your penetration testing. When you do your penetration testing and VAPTs, right, ensure you're looking at the right guidances and references like NIST, like OWASP, right? These are the global standards that typically you should consider when you're doing that testing. Point number one. Now let's talk to the part that people often ignore, right? The documentation side. You need to maintain software bill of material, right? A software bill of material, Ankit, is similar to a hardware bill of material, right? Where you basically highlight what are the different components that you have used in compiling your software, right? Software bill of material. Your architecture, right? Your software architecture. Your software architecture not only defining how the data goes to and flow, but also within your architecture, where are the vulnerability points and how have you taken care of those vulnerabilities through your design is something you should highlight, right? Your overall cybersecurity management plan, right? That is another thing you should consider. What goes into the plan and all the nitty-gritty, we can discuss that later, but cybersecurity management plan is another thing that you should have as you define your cybersecurity process, overall cybersecurity process. Another most important thing, Ankit, if you are aware of the risk management that we do for safety, to take care of the safety of the product in line with ISO 14971, similarly, there is something called as threat modeling. You need to put emphasis on threat modeling from a cybersecurity perspective. The concept and the thought process of threat modeling and risk management is pretty much the same, right? But still the way we do the threat modeling is slightly different to the way we do the overall risk management, right? So these are the few things that I would like to share with you that you should keep in mind when you are looking at cybersecurity for not just active devices, but any device that has software, firmware, or even if it is a SAMD on its own. I hope that helps.
Excellent. That was great. We also have another question from Kamlesh, who asks, can you briefly discuss the artificial intelligence in biomedical devices and what should we learn from it? I think you're the expert here, Varun, on AI devices, so I'll hand it over to you.
Kamlesh, AI itself is a topic, right? And I will take that input to consider if we can form a webinar around it, right? But AI itself is a topic, and what I would like to share with you in the most simplest way is, end of the day, AI is also software, right? Yes, the way it operates, the things that it does is very different, and it has its own thing that it comes up with the learning mechanism and all that, right? But end of the day, it is also software. The core of AI development is tied to, as of today, at least as of today, is tied to the way we do software development. There are certain nitty-gritties that you need to keep in mind, especially with respect to the training and testing algorithms, the training and testing data sets, right? The overall data set management becomes the key, but the overall development process for an AI, if you focus on IEC 62304 to begin with, right, will give you a good hold of your AI, of your overall AI process, right? Apart from that, there are a few other things, right, which if I'll start